Okay, so today's talk is neurosonography, the basics and the applications. Sonography is still a very important first line imaging modality used widely in the management of premature and high risk neonates. It is a simple, fast, accurate, and easily reproducible method of imaging the intracranial structures. There is no exposure to ionizing radiation at all, and this is one of the biggest advantages. No anesthesia or sedation is required. Portability is a great advantage, and bedside scans can be done in the NICU where you have unstable infants which cannot be moved to imaging in the radiology area. It's relatively lower in cost, ideal for serial follow-up studies in cases of intracranial hemorrhage, periventricular leukomalacia, hydrocephalus, etc. Color Doppler study allows study of the intracranial blood flow and changes in different pathologies. 3D examinations helps in understanding anatomy of the complex pathologies. Of course, there are recognized limitations, and one is blind areas along the convexities of the cerebrum, and the other is lack of global view. And third is, of course, operator dependency. Ultrasound beams cannot penetrate through bones, so it is the fontanelles which are the acoustic windows which allow us to look at the intracranial contents. And so the usage is limited to only neonates and infants. Fontanelles remain open up to 2 years of age, but optimal scan and good scans can be diagnostic value can be obtained up to 6 months of age. But limited information like follow-up of hydrocephalus, etc., can be followed up till 12 to 14 months, because when there's an increased intracranial pressure, the fontanelles tend to close a little later. The most commonly used fontanelle is the anterior fontanelle, which allows us a good visualization of the supratentorial region. And then depending on your area of interest, you can use the other fontanelles. The ultrasound machine should have right probes, and very important to have proper software presets for cranial ultrasound, so you don't have to keep on fiddling with your gains and everything once you started scanning. You need small footprint probes which fit best in the fontanelle, either sector or microconvex. The angle should be wide, more than 120 degrees, so it will give us a wider far field of view. We usually use a microconvex 8.4 megahertz probe or a 9.4 megahertz probe, depending on the size of the head. And linear high frequency probes 12.5 and 18.5 are used for evaluating the superficial structures, the venous sinuses, the extraaxial fluid collection, sulcal details. And all transducers preferably should be capable of doing color or duplex Doppler imaging. So you need to have a quiet, relaxed infant. You have aseptic precautions, especially in the NICU. Use plenty of warm jelly. Place the probe on the anterior fontanelle. You do coronal and sagittal scans. For sagittal scan, you rock the transducer laterally to the from side to side. Coronal sections you do anterior to posterior rocking movement of the transducer to get all the images that you want. Images are documented in standardized planes. Then the probe that you choose. What probe should you choose? A higher the frequency, better the resolution, but poorer the penetration. So it is a trade-off. It is better to keep 2-3 probes handed and attached to the machine and ready, so you can choose whatever probe you need at that time. So here we have an abnormality in the region of the cerebellum, which is not very well seen when we are using the higher frequency. The cerebrum is better seen. Posterior fossa, we don't get penetration up to the posterior fossa. Then color Doppler helps you to look at the vessels. You can do through the anterior fontanelle, you will see circle of Willis, anterior cerebral artery. You can use the temporal window. As I said before, you can see the circle of Willis better. You can sample any of these vessels at whatever level you want. So let us look at changes of birth asphyxia. Again, we have extensively heard the type of damage that takes place in premature neonate and in a full-term neonate. So in a premature neonate, IVH and periventricular leukomalacia is commoner, whereas HI is or extensive cortical changes are seen more often in a term neonate. So, which babies are prone to IVH? Premature babies which are less than 32 weeks gestation, which are low birth weight, less than 1500 grams, are more prone to IVH. You have grade 1 to 4. And what is the importance of these grades? It helps us to predict the outcome. Grade 1 to 2 is associated with minimal risk of handicap, whereas grade 3 to 4 IVH more often lead to neurological compromise. So let us look at the different grades. Grade 1 is subependymal hemorrhage. As we said before, the choroid plexus extends only up to the caudothalamic notch as we are seeing. But what is there on the left side? You are seeing an echogenic area on the floor of the lateral ventricle anterior to the choroid plexus, and in transverse also you can see it on the floor of the frontal horn, and this is a subependymal or germinal matrix hemorrhage, which is grade 1. It is just outside the ependyma. The minute the ependyma breaks and the blood goes into the ventricle, it becomes a grade 2 hemorrhage where you have presence of blood within the ventricle. And grade 2, usually the ventricles are normal in size. Ventricles are not distended or dilated. Here we can only on coronal see a little asymmetry of the choroid plexus, and here also you can see this choroid plexus looks thicker, but what the a posterior fossa scan clinches the diagnosis. This is on the right side where you have the normal ventricle. You are getting fluid within the occipital horn, which is clear anechoic CSF. But on the right side, you see this echogenic clot, which is within the occipital horn. Again, like we said before, the choroid plexus does not extend into the occipital horn. So this is a grade 2 IVH with presence of blood clot within the occipital horn, which is the dependent portion as the baby is lying down supine. Grade 3 is when you have intraventricular hemorrhage, but you have a large hemorrhage. There's a large clot filling the lateral ventricles, and the lateral ventricles are distended, like you can see here. There's bilateral hemorrhage here, but larger on the right side, as you can see here, with little bit of displacement, and it is extending into the third ventricle also. This is associated quite often with periventricular white matter injury, and there is a higher likelihood of developing obstructive hydrocephalus. This is another patient of grade 3 IVH. This is a follow-up examination. As you can see, this is on day 8. There is a retraction of the clot. Some amount of clear CSF is now seen. It's not the same patient. This is another patient. There's some amount of CSF which is outlining the clot. Here I want you to note this echogenic line which forms the wall of the lateral ventricle, which is not seen in a normal lateral ventricle, and this is due to subependymal gliosis, which takes place when there is presence of blood within the lateral ventricle. So even if you don't see the clot and you see this sort of an echogenic lining of the lateral ventricle, you know that there has been a intraventricular hemorrhage which is probably resolved. This is a follow-up at 18 days. You can see the lateral ventricle has now started dilating. So this tells you that there is some amount of obstructive pathology. The clot is slowly resolving, and you can only see a small clot within the occipital horn. This child head circumference kept on increasing, and as you can see over here, that the fourth ventricle is also dilated, and the spectral Doppler in cases of obstructive hydrocephalus will show you an increase resistance with an absent diastolic flow. In fact, if you apply pressure on the fontanelle with your probe while you're doing a color Doppler, if it's an obstructive hydrocephalus, immediately the pattern will change and you will get a higher resistance with some amount of flow reversal. This tells you that this is likely to be an obstructive hydrocephalus. Grade 4 IVH is when you have a parenchymal component or you have parenchymal hemorrhage along with intraventricular hemorrhage. Here you can see there's clots there, and there's a large occipital hemorrhage over here which is getting liquefied and probably will form a procephalic cyst. Intraventricular hemorrhage can form large porencephalic cysts which can communicate with the lateral ventricle, can also give rise to obstructive hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is caused by obliterative arachnoiditis or obstruction by a clot or by septations or debris. Usually, hydrocephalus starts appearing by 28 to days onwards, by 3 months, and starts resolving 4 weeks after the development of hydrocephalus. Less than 10% of babies with IVH who developed hydrocephalus require a shunt. Most of them will start resolving by themselves, and hence serial imaging, serial ultrasound is recommended, and that is where exact measurements at an exact point is necessary. We should measure the frontal horns, we should measure the lateral ventricles at the level of your 3-dot signs, which is at the level of the foramen of Monro, and you should measure the lateral ventricles in the region of the trigone, and keep following up regularly, doing the measurements, and you can do what is called as a VH ratio, which is the ventriculus to hemispheric ratio. Now, if ventricles are equally dilated, you can do a VH ratio with both ventricles and across both hemispheres. However, it can also be done for each hemisphere separately to look at the ratio and see how the cortex is developing. Another sequelae of intraventricular hemorrhage or ventriculitis is what is called as a trapped fourth ventricle, where you have an obstruction at the level of aqueduct and at the level of foramen of Luschka and Magendie, and this causes an isolation of the fourth ventricle which dilates, and this fourth ventricle can herniate upwards supratentorially through this thing, causes pressure on the brainstem and cerebellum. That brings us to periventricular leukomalacia, which is an ischemic abnormality involving the deep white matter. The cerebral cortex is paired, as we heard before. On ultrasound, it is often suspected in the acute phase and confirmed in follow-up studies. I was really surprised to hear in the MR also, as doctor said, previous speaker said, that it is after 7-8 days that the confirmation process takes place. So how do we differentiate PVL between a normal periventricular halo? A normal periventricular halo has very ill-defined margins. It's more brush-like. The echogenicity is less than that of the choroid plexus. And if you scan through the posterior fontanelle, the echogenicity of the periventricular halo, which is a normal appearance, will decrease on the posterior fontanelle approach. Whereas in a periventricular leukomalacia, you have very well-defined borders as compared to a normal periventricular brush-like appearance. It is often clumpy. It is not very smooth. The echogenicity is more than that of the choroid plexus. The echogenicity of the periventricular leukomalacia will persist. In fact, it might become a little more prominent on posterior fontanelle approach. And if you do a color Doppler, there will be a vasodilatation. So the RI values will be reduced. This is a normal response wherever there has been a hypoxic damage to the brain because of the altered metabolism and because of nitric acid secretion. There is a vasodilatation, and you get very low RI in the intracranial vessels. Usually the MC is what we try and sample. So in this patient on day 2, there was an increased echogenicity in the periventricular region, which looked like periventricular leukomalacia was suspected, but he said follow up after a week. And on day 6, this appearance was more severe and tiny cysts had started appearing. And by as you can see, it's become more localized in the periventricular lesion. And by day 11, tiny cysts were seen, and this was confirmed as periventricular leukomalacia. You can have gross ranges of periventricular leukomalacia. You can have multiple cysts will coalesce to form large cysts. These may communicate with the lateral ventricle in very severe cases, and there will be loss of gliosis and atrophy with ex vacuo dilatation of the lateral ventricles.